All right, so we have Lauralea Tanner with me, the long-awaited, most successful post I've ever had at LinkedIn, over 4,000 views. So you're very likable, and apparently everyone knows you. Uh, so I met Lauralea probably 2 years ago, maybe not even that long ago. You guys
Yeah,
were John Ducharme introduced us, right? Is that
that's right. That's
yeah?
right.
I'm right. So a little bio on Laura Lee. I had to go through her LinkedIn. It was long. There's a lot. You've done a lot in your career, which is awesome. You're currently the Chief Revenue Officer at Avita. Um, but you're at Abeo, Miramed, MDN, Clear Balance back when that wasn't even cool.
Right. Long.
HMS for a long time, and then Pixis. We just talked about Pixis, and I was in the OR for a period of time, so I remember those days. So you've had this long storied kind of career, and working a lot in sales, right? Like mostly sales or client engagement. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, it's kind of an even mix between sales, client relationship management, and
Yeah.
operations. So I ran operations at Avio, and
Oh,
yeah, so
okay. Yeah.
very, very.
Nice. I was going to tell a story because I always like to start out with a story, and then we'll talk about kind of sales. I want to get your take on kind of the current state. I have my own thoughts on it, but you've been living in that world a lot longer than I did or have. I'm going to leave the name of the. You've heard this story before, but I'm going to leave the name of the event of, let's just call it the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. Um, Back to the Future roots. That's one of my daughter's favorite movies right now. So when my buddy Doug Lang, who is a sales guy, worked for me when I was at Health Rise. We were getting started and we're trying to, just trying to find our way. You know how this is, Literally. It's like you're trying to find your way. You're trying to make connections, and you're like, oh, we'll just go to these events. We'll go to all these events, and we're gonna meet all these people. And so we started to do that, and we had a couple of vendors, because we're meeting the same people, as a lot of these people are the same people, and so they're like, you got to go to this one event. You got to go to the Under the Sea event, we'll call it. You got to go. It's awesome. It's like the best event. We're like, we got to go. So we get a booth. We do the whole thing, right? And so we do this, and then we go, and we're setting up the booth on a Sunday afternoon, kind of classic, right? It's like Sunday evening start. And we run into these people that have been telling us, you got to come to this thing. And it's like, mind you, it's 2 PM, and they're drunk, hammered. And so Doug and I were like, what is happening? What is going on? What? And then we figure out this whole event is just, I don't know if boondoggle is the right word, but basically just, it was people just getting drunk, basically, with a few handful of select kind of niche group providers that were there. And I've been to that thing a couple of times now, and I would say it's the exact same thing each time. And so anyways, I found it interesting kind of being in that world, and the one thing, so my point of that story is Doug and I looked at each other yeah, I don't drink that much anyways. And I certainly don't want to drink this much with people I don't really know to get client. That just seems, I'm not doing that. So anyways, so that was kind of our foray into kind of what, I don't know, what maybe clients, what providers are kind of faced with right now. So I would love to hear your take on kind of where do you think the current environment for sales is? How do you think providers feel about, what's their viewpoint on kind of what's happening in the market?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think some of that still happens, unfortunately. And when you go to some industry events, you see that providers aren't present, and I have to wonder if that's part of the reason why.
Right.
It's very, off-putting. I've seen careers ruined as a result of some of these industry conferences and people, not being adults. So
Right.
it's very disappointing to see that happen. I think that relationships are still very important in our business, But I also think that providers are expecting us to come to the table and not just be self-promoting, but actually be a resource and to teach them something, share with them what's going on in the industry. I think back to when I first got in this business, technology was patient accounting systems or maybe, online eligibility. But now there's so many other technologies out there. And I think they really do want to hear from us about what's going on and what's coming down the pike, what's on the roadmap, how does artificial intelligence play into it? And we have to be smarter in terms of, using our time wisely when we meet with these providers. Gosh, we're all so busy, and they're even busier, competing priorities, many of them going through conversions. We have to respect their time. But I do think that relationships are still important in this business, but they do expect us to come to the table with more and to be educated when we come in and to do our homework when we come in.
Do you think there's more noise? And they're like, if you look back kind of even 4 or 5 years ago, I got to imagine as a provider, there's just even more noise and people contacting them. And I don't know. I get a sense that they're just overwhelmed with the number of people that.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And many of the providers that I've talked to have said, look, if I can find one vendor partner that does multiple things instead of having 10 vendor partners that do 10 things, and that's more valuable to me. And so, I think we just have to think about that as we're, developing our products and our solutions for these providers. They're trying to consolidate. So.
Interesting. So I'm curious to know from your perspective, I could definitely see how the good old boy network, if you will, is still alive and well. So-and-so knows so-and-so, and they go golfing together, or like, I don't know. So I'd be curious to know from your perspective, is that still alive, still moving? And even, from a woman's perspective, what is it like to be a female in this kind of male-dominated culture, society?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm curious.
Well, it's interesting. My very first job in sales, we were selling, early out solutions. And I went to the provider, director of PFS at the time. And I walked in, he had a current vendor, and that current vendor had just taken him black bear hunting in Russia. Like, how do you compete with that, right?
I mean, 20 grand easily trip, right?
Easily. And it's like, how do you compete with that? Now, I think that as time has gone on, hospitals become more cognizant of compliance issues, and you don't see those big trips, and you don't see providers, partaking in that. But still, networking is important. And, for me, I'm not a golfer. Most of the events that I go to, there are plenty of golfing opportunities, including yours, Ben. But, it's like, I'm not a golfer. And you look at people out on the golf course, and it's predominantly men. And it is tough. It's really tough to build those relationships with people outside of the office.
Yeah.
So.
What advice would you give? Let's say I'm 24 or 25. I'm female. I start in sales. What advice would you give to people kind of coming into it now? I mean, you've been doing this 20 plus years. Yeah. I mean, you started when you were 10, so I mean,
exactly.
Of course. But I mean, you were there long enough. Like, what advice would you give to people now? Like, especially, that group. I think it's just so challenging. I don't even know how to answer. I've got, again, I've told you I'm white male, come with, way too much privilege. So.
Yeah. Well, I guess giving advice, all I can do is tell you what I've done in my career. And I think it's proven successful for me. And that is I just feel like going into a meeting, I have to be overly prepared. I have to make sure that I'm doing my homework, show up with numbers. And I think this gets back to what we were just talking about. I think providers are expecting us to know more. They're looking for us to be a resource, not a sales pitch. And I think as a woman, that makes it even more important because I don't get the opportunity to golf with them. It can be, perceived differently if I have dinner with a male, right? Just one-on-one.
Right.
So I have to use my time wisely. So in preparing for a meeting, I do, try to do as much homework as I possibly can. There are all sorts of tools out there, right? So you have, I'm a big believer in definitive healthcare. I think that you can, even though it's based on cost report information, so it's the data somewhat delayed,
Right.
you can get a good picture of what's going on in that organization. And so many people don't do that. They don't know walking in, what the situation is. What is the financial environment? Days cash on hand, AR days. I mean, what does their balance sheet look like? You can get all of that from definitive.
Right.
Back when, early in my career, I was selling Medicare cost reporting, Medicare bad debt, specifically, and Medicare dish. And, one of the things that we did was we went out and we procured the HICRIS data. So the cost report data that CMS maintains. And we analyzed that data, and we were able to see that in one particular state, every provider in that state was underclaiming. And the question was why? Well, they were all scared to death with their auditor. And they were afraid they were going to get audited, or they were afraid that the whole, everything would be denied. So we put together an analysis, and there was a very big provider in this state that we sent an analysis to, along with a cover letter requesting a meeting to talk about this. And it took an entire year, but a year to the date of that letter, we signed a contract. And, it was just doing that homework up front and bringing to them our analysis of a perceived problem. They saw it, they looked at it, and they were like, you know what, you're right. We had no idea. Thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Right.
So, I feel like doing your homework, understanding what's going on in the hospital, and then also educating yourself beyond just the product that you're selling. The solution that, that Paul Jaragoski and I sell right now, the patient loan program, raises questions and has implications in other areas. And often hospitals will ask us, well, what about, 501R, or what about Medicare bad debt? And to actually understand what goes on with those programs and how our program might impact brings value to the provider. So regardless of male or female, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice for anybody, but yeah. Just seems like, it seems like, I think what I ran into was just that it was like you said, it's all a relationship.
It starts with a relationship. But
it's hard to make new ones if you're not having a really an opportunity to. And the old conferences just aren't,
right.
they're not most of those people aren't coming anymore. It feels like.
Well, what I have found is when you can engage a provider and provide some meaningful information, they then start to see you as that resource, and they'll come back to you because I enjoy talking to Ben. Every time I talk to Ben, I learn something new. So I'm going to keep talking to Ben. Whereas if you go into that first meeting and you go in, you're not prepared, you don't provide valuable information, you'll never get that second chance. Never. And so, I think it's important, male or female, but especially as a female, not having as many of those networking opportunities, I think it's even more important.
Right. This is awesome. Well, I don't think I have anything else. I think this was great, Lauralee. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. For having me.
One last plug just for Leaders Forum. Like, what would you tell other providers or our vendors about what Leaders Forum's like? What would you say?
It's incredible, and not just because I'm talking to you here, but I think that it's, from my perspective as a vendor partner, being able to sit down shoulder to shoulder with some of the top providers in the country, some of the top thought leaders, and be able to bounce ideas off of and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Are we going down the right path? And I think that, as a relatively new company and a developing product line, that is invaluable. I think that the best products and solutions out there are the ones that have been designed in conjunction with or in response to a provider need. So to be able to sit down with the folks that usually attend your forums from a provider perspective and get their input, even if they don't need my service, it's incredibly valuable.
Right.
I think, I can only imagine from a provider perspective, they too are getting a lot out of it. Not necessarily from talking to me, maybe they are, but even their peers.
I'm sure.
I mean, there's been so much thought-provoking conversation. I mean, we need to change the way we're looking at revenue cycle, without a doubt. We need to change some of our practices. We need to be more forward-thinking. We need to get more aggressive, because it's not getting any easier out there. There's a lot of competition. Deductibles are growing. The payers aren't, being any easier to work with. And so as a healthcare revenue cycle organization, holistically, we need to think better. And I think that all of those conversations take place at the Revenue Cycle Leaders Forum.
Yeah, that's great. I was just talking to a provider leader yesterday, big place, and he said one of his challenges, honestly, is that his costs keep going up. He's like, if I look back 5 years, my costs are up 20-some%.
Right.
Like we can't sustain that. I'm like, yeah, that's an issue. That's an issue.
Right.
That's
right. So, and now with pricing transparency, and it's
right.
We're the bad guy, and in the in the eyes of the consumer, and it's totally unfair. I think we're trying. We just need to continue to try harder every day.
Yeah, we're definitely not getting a good reputation.
No.
On multiple fronts. Well, excellent. I appreciate the time. This has been great. I'm sure people will love it. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. Thanks, Ben. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.